members of the executive management, members of Senate, our inaugurant this afternoon, Professor Vimolan Mudaly, Professor Ronika Mudaly, family and friends of Professor Mudaly, academics and members of the professional staff, students, alumni, representatives from the Department of Education, colleagues from higher education institutions, locally and internationally, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nhlanhla Mkhize. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor and the Head of the College of Humanities at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nana Poku, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor Vimolan Mudaly. The Vice Chancellor conveys his congratulations and best wishes to Professor Vimolan Mudaly. Inaugural lectures form part of the university's public lecture series and may only be presented by newly appointed full professors who have been appointed in academic schools, centers, and institutes. Inaugural lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university. Each lecture presents a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion or appointment to full professorship. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution to their field, to academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with his family, friends, and colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, I would therefore like to call upon Professor Thabo Msibi, the Dean and Head of the School of Education, to introduce our inaugurant, Professor Vimolan Mudaly. Thank you.
Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of the College of Humanities, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, our inaugurant for this afternoon, Professor Vimolan Mudaly and his family, academic staff, students, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor to introduce one of our most distinguished academics here in the School of Education, Professor Vimolan Mudaly. Professor Mudaly completed his undergraduate degree in mathematics and science education at the former University of Durban-Westville and obtained an honors degree in education from the University of South Africa. He was awarded his Master's of Education degree cum laude and subsequently obtained a doctoral degree from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor Mudaly serves as an external and chief marker of the National Senior Certificate Examination and was a chairperson of a major professional body, the Association of Mathematics Educators in South Africa in the KwaZulu-Natal sector. Excuse me. In 2003, Professor Mudaly joined UKZN, and his passion for teaching mathematics within the South African context for the South African student led to a specialization in mathematical modeling and the use of manipulatives to understand geometry. This created a fertile ground for excelling in the field of visualization and mathematics, where he has firmly established an international profile. Professor Mudaly has made a substantive and significant contribution through a cogent body of work in both visualization and active learning in mathematics, and this is attested to by his scholarship of more than 58 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and conference proceedings. He has published in several international and high-impact journals, such as the Montana Mathematics Enthusiast, In 2016, he was ranked amongst the top 30 prolific researchers at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and received accolades for having achieved the first position in the School of Education. His commitment to developing and enhancing scholarship in the field is evidenced by the graduation of more than 36 PhD and master students under his supervision. International collaboration with highly acclaimed researchers in mathematics education from Illinois State University, the University of Buffalo, and the University of Southampton serve as an endorsement of his research standing as a leading scholar. He has delivered plenary addresses at many national and international conferences, including the USA conference in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The recognition of his work nationally resulted in invitations to other universities to lead discussions on visualization research and to engage in the work of the Special Interest Group in Visualization and the discussion group held in Taipei, as well as a topic study group in Shanghai, China. He served as the associate editor of a leading mathematics education journal in South Africa, which is called the Pythagoras, and is a member of the editorial board of Learning and Teaching Mathematics. Professor Mudaly's work has a far-reaching and significant impact on society. He was appointed as a member of the South African government expert team to report on the effects of COVID-19 on education by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, the Department of Government Technical Advisory Center, as well as the National Research Foundation. He has served as lead author of the education chapter of the country report on COVID-19. Besides hosting research workshops for postgraduate students in mathematics education discipline, Professor Mudaly has also been invited as a guest lecturer internationally to conduct research workshops, especially in the area of qualitative research and analysis. His expertise has been recognized through his regular invitations to comment on national television, on radio and newspapers, on current and urgent educational matters in the field of education. Ladies and gentlemen, let me invite our inaugurant this afternoon, Professor Vimolan Mudaly, to address us on a topic, My Mobius Trip, a journey from mathematical modeling to the iterative visualization thinking cycle and beyond. Professor Mudaly.
I extend my humble greetings to our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nana Poku, our Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of the College of Humanities, Professor Nkize, our Dean and Head of the School of Education, Professor Thabo Msibi, my friends and colleagues in the school and university, my friends and family who have joined today's function, the students of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who are, of course, our reason for being here, and our loyal alumni, and all other valued guests. I am honored and humbled to be invited to present here today. I also extend my gratitude to the two wonderful ladies who assisted with the organization of this event, Sandhya Ramsurup and Pamela Adams. What an extreme pleasure and privilege it is to have you here today and to be hosted by the ever inspirational and compassionate Professor Nkize and introduced by Professor Msibi, a globally recognized leader in higher education. I am going to share with you some of the most important ideas that I have learned and worked with over 19 years or so. But before I begin with my actual talk, I want to use this opportunity to publicly extend my gratitude to so many people who have actually contributed to my success. Today is a celebration, and I am so glad that you are here to share this moment with me. Firstly, I declare at the very outset that my birth in life has been and still is completely surrendered to my spiritual preceptors, Swami Shivananda and Swami Sahajananda. By their grace, I have developed the meager skills that brought me to this podium this afternoon. There are two teachings that I have sought to aspire towards. Put your heart, mind, intellect, and soul even to your smallest acts. This is the secret to my success. And the DIN principle, do it now. God has been my guide and friend throughout this journey that I have traveled so joyfully, and I am ever so grateful to both of them. This is also a wonderful opportunity to foreground the people who have genetically and karmically contributed to my success in life. My late mom and dad, who are probably looking at me from another plane and are smiling down on me. I know they would have wanted to be here today, but God had other plans for them. I offer this presentation to my brother, who passed on at the age of 6 when I was 4, and the only memory I have of him is his funeral. I thought I'd project the only picture I have of myself as a baby. We grew up in abject poverty with great sacrifices made by my parents and my siblings, especially my eldest brother. I am grateful to all members of my family. They are an enthusiastic bunch who support unconditionally. I also thank my wife's family for their support. These are my 3 musketeers, Diveshni, my younger daughter, Ronika, my wife, and Shivani, my elder daughter, who have allowed me the freedom to grow and become whom I am today. It is with great joy that I acknowledge that my daughters have inherited my great love for mathematics. I also offer bouquets of gratitude to those people who have supported my growth as an academic. Ronika has been a caring listener, mentor, my digital diary, and cheerleader. Professor Michael de Villiers has been a mentor and an initiator of my love for computer exploration using Sketchpad and hence my entire research field. There are 2 special colleagues that I must thank. Professor Deborah Moore-Rousseau, now in University of Oklahoma, who provided me with my first international collaboration, and Professor Norma Presmeg, Professor Emeritus at Illinois State University, who actually started me on this road to visual thinking when she taught at UDW during my undergraduate study, and later we collaborated internationally as well. Labi was the person I could go to for advice during all of my years as an academic. Shakila and Jayalakshmi have both been great supporters of the work that I did. Sarah and Prof. MCB, your encouragement and belief in me has not gone unnoticed. I offer bouquets to my colleagues in the mathematics department. Their commitment and care has always been a welcoming presence at work. I feel immense pride to know that 4 members of the math staff started off as postgraduate students of mine. I also offer my salutations to all the cleaning and security personnel, all of my undergraduate, honors, MEd, and PhD students as well. I certainly am who I am because of you. My research is focused on the spatial and imagery aspects of mathematics. I learned very early in my career that we often don't know what we see. We only see what we know. For example, if you looked at this picture, some of you may have no idea what this represents. A priori knowledge may lead to the interpretation that eggs are being released or seeds being dispersed. But if I produce further information, you may have a cursory understanding that this represents the COVID-19 particles emerging from ruptured cells. This is a generalized example. Let me consider a mathematical example. The pictures that follow are of the Kanisa triangle, and it demonstrates exactly what I am referring to. Looking at the figure, how many triangles can you identify? It is easy to count them because we know what a triangle is. The mind tells us that a triangle is a 3-sided figure. So our immediate reaction is to count all 3-sided figures that we can see. You are seeing what you know. But there may be some amongst us who are already questioning the veracity of the existence of these triangles. By carefully removing strategically placed angular lines and Pac-Man objects, it removes the illusion of triangles. So if I remove the lines and objects, or even turn the objects around, you will see that the triangles no longer exist. The similar illusion is visible in the last 2 images. We see what we know. You know about circles and quadrilaterals, so you see it, despite the fact that they don't really exist. Much of the work I do relates to the ideas around the seeing eye and the seeing brain, and how visualization contributes to actual understanding. So what does my topic really have to do with what I present today? The Mobius strip is a one-sided surface that can be constructed quite easily. There you have a normal strip of paper. If you stick the ends together, you have a normal band with two surfaces, the inside and the outside. Now, if you take the same strip and you give it a 1/2 twist, like so, and then stick the ends together, you construct a one-sided surface called a Mobius strip. If you were to draw a line on a Mobius strip, you would never have to lift your pencil. Follow carefully the ball, and you would see that it travels through the entire loop, covering the entire strip. See how much easier an animation explains. You know what you see. You develop high levels of conviction by seeing this in action. A typical thought experiment to demonstrate how the three-dimensional strip operates involves imagining an athlete on his daily run. Picture him traversing the Mobius band. One loop would land him exactly where he started, but he would have to run upside down through part of the circuit. Now, the significance of the Mobius strip in my research trajectory, as you will see just now, is that I started off at a point young, eager, and uncertain about what I wanted to do. Here I am today, researching in exactly the same field, but stronger, confident, and recognized internationally for the work that I am doing. This then is my story. My earliest recollections of my love for the spatial aspects of mathematics showed during my schooling career, when I preferred to mainly work with geometry problems. I was not a real mathematics buffon because I had an aversion for working with the mathematics that I could not represent diagrammatically. My initial foraging into the ideas of researching started in my 4th year undergraduate English usage class in 1986. Students were assigned to either the controversial, seemingly strict Mr. Lorero's class or the genial, gentle Betty Govindan's class. I was placed in Mr. Lorero's class. One day, without warning, he asked me what subject I was preparing to teach. My cheeky response to this academic who taught English was that there was only one subject worth teaching, which was mathematics. A tremendous uproar erupted in the room to his great delight. His provocation had worked, and he challenged me with the words, "Prove it," as he swiped his finger over his eyebrow. I had no access to internet then and conducted a laborious literature search similar to a desktop study. Eventually, after reading through about 150 articles, I produced a handwritten mini thesis about why mathematics was most important for every human to engage with. I argued that every creation has been crafted meticulously with such mathematical precision that it is highly unlikely that this occurred by chance through a series of bangs. The paper argued about the spatial aspects of mathematics. It had to do with the planetary motion and everything related to the world we live in. That was my very first paper, and he shared the paper with other lecturers in the faculty. Mr. Lorero and I became quite good friends, and he introduced me to Betty Govindan, who has remained a dear colleague and role model. Mr. Lorero provided me with a number of mathematics journals to encourage my development in the field of mathematics education. My thirst for research was born. This occurred in 1986. I was a baby then, entering this arduous but exciting field of research. I was then fortunate to be introduced to my mentor, Professor Michael de Villiers, a world-renowned geometer. That proved to be a turning point in my research career. My first formal research project was titled Pupils' Needs for Conviction and Explanation within the context of dynamic geometry. Here are some of the findings. Given a mathematical word problem, learners generally struggle with interpretation and converting it into a mathematical form. This study allowed the learners to play around on the computer with Sketchpad, a computer software. The experience was highly visual for them. They could see exactly what unfolded on the screen. The movement and the measurements convinced them of the truth of a result and helped to develop high levels of conviction. There was an interesting observation. Despite the high levels of conviction about the conjecture they established, learners demonstrated an intrinsic desire for an explanation, or stated simply, they wanted a proof. They were convinced through their observation and experimentation that the result on the screen was always true, but they wanted to know why the result was true as compared to whether the result was true. Even an attempt to confuse them through cognitive conflict did not work. The act of moving points on a screen and seeing the result displayed on the screen is a type of visual proof in itself. Constructing a logical argument thereafter becomes much easier because seeing the images on the screen allowed them to see the generalization in the particular diagrams they were constructing. Now they were seeing what they know. More significantly, this research found that given the proper guidance, learners can construct reasonable explanations or proofs for their conjectures. This was the result in 2001, and the findings were exciting and spurred me on. The thesis was my first research report, and the Netherlands-based Hans Freudenthal Institute requested a copy. Let me share an example of a Sketchpad activity that grade 9 learners engaged in. This was a one-on-one activity, and they were first given a copy of the problem to read and interpret. The problem was, Sarah, a shipwreck survivor, manages to swim to an island which is in the shape of an equilateral triangle. That means all sides are equal in length. She discovers that the surfing is outstanding on all three of the island's beaches. She builds a surfboard using wood from a fallen tree and surfs every day. Learners were asked the question, where should Sarah build a house so that the sum of the distances from the house she builds to all three beaches is as small as possible? Each learner quickly and confidently stated that she should build at the center of the triangular island. They were then allowed to work with the already constructed triangle on Sketchpad, and this is how it looked. So this triangle represented the equilateral island that was given to them. The learners could test whether this triangle given to them was in fact isosceles by selecting each of the sides and measuring it. They could measure it using the facility offered by Geometry Sketchpad. And of course, they were then asked, whilst working on the program, they were asked to move the point O to where they think Sarah should build a house. All learners, each of the learners moved the point to the center. So the triangle constructed here on Sketchpad represents the island. Learners could check whether this was an equilateral triangle by simply selecting each side and measuring its length, or they could measure the angles. Thereafter, they were again asked to move O to show where Sarah's house could be built. Each learner moved point O to the center, like they stated when I asked them first. This obviously related to their a priori knowledge, which told them that the central point is equidistant to all points, and therefore it would be most appropriate. Somehow, they related the sum of the distances to each side to the idea of equidistance, like that of a radii in a circle. They were asked to construct the distances from O to each. And let me construct O. So they were asked to construct the perpendicular distances from O to each of these sides. And I have constructed it simply like this. So this is what the learners constructed. And then they were asked to measure the lengths of each of the distances like so. So they could measure the distances. And thereafter, they were asked to find the sum of those distances of DO. So there's the distance DO, OF. Let me move O to that side so they can be seen. So they could, they measured DO, OF, and OE. That is what they have there. And then they were asked to find the sum of those three distances. So the sum appeared there. The learners were then asked to move the point around. But when they were asked to move the point around, I specifically said, watch very carefully what happens to these values. As they moved this point around, they had to keep very careful attention. They had to pay very careful attention to these three values. And so they moved it around, and you can also watch. You would notice that the distances were changing, but the sum was not. And you can see that I can move it to many points very quickly. They spent about 2 minutes moving this around, and they noticed that whilst the distances were changing, some did not at all. Whilst they could have thought that this was manipulated by me, that means I might have organized for the sum to be the same. I asked them to move it to any point, stop, use a calculator, find the sum, and check whether it was the same. Then move it to another point, stop, find the sum, and check whether it was the same. The result was surprising and different from what they had expected. This is the power of Sketchpad, because it is a visual tool that can be used effectively to introduce visual analytical thinking. So this is what students saw. My second formal research project extended the findings from the first one. Here I looked at the role and use of Sketchpad as a modeling tool in secondary schools. Again, given real-world problems, learners tended to first use their intuition and preconception by guessing the solution. So when given a problem and they were asked to state what they thought the solution was, they will simply guess a solution because they used their a priori knowledge. They were then exposed to the use of Sketchpad. Being able to work so easily with Sketchpad made the exploration much more exciting and productive because the learners were discovering by doing and seeing. Inevitably, this led to patterns being established and hypotheses being made, which may have been much more difficult if only pencil and paper methods were used. This was a visual process that allowed for them to see what was happening and assimilate their results into a formal conjecture. The use of their a priori knowledge and Sketchpad helped them to move the real-world problem into a mathematical one. They began to mathematize. This was an unfamiliar real-world problem, but the learners were able to develop and apply a model, albeit by a guided process, which resulted in new knowledge. Critical to this type of study is that the success of a mathematical model depends on how well you can see the behavior of the model. Visualization is useful in modeling, and Sketchpad allows one to see exactly the changes that take place as the model is created and tested. It allowed the learners in this experiment to quickly and easily work through hundreds of different diagrams in a few minutes, which would have been almost impossible if other traditional methods were used. Sketchpad also allowed the learners to gain sudden insight. As they experienced the changes on the screen, they suddenly discover a pattern. The experience of being surprised was in fact more than just that. It was the point at which the learners discovered relationships that were unfolding on the computer screen. It is this capacity to suddenly gain new insights that makes learning through the use of dynamic computer software all the more worthwhile. By 2003, I seemed to be progressing to my goal. I was getting there, but this was more difficult somehow. It explains my rather slow gait. You have to agree that vision trumps all other senses. There is evidence to prove that. You are more likely to remember better what you see, but again, we see what we know. I place this here to demonstrate how the visual perspective is important. What is the number of the parking space covered by the car? All one has to do in this case is mentally reorientate the diagram. We tend to see the picture from this direction, the blue arrow, but really we need to look at the picture from this direction, the red arrow. If we looked at it from the blue arrow, we would see the number 16, 06, 68, 88, car, and 98. But if we looked at it from the red arrow, from the direction of the red arrow, we would see the numbers 86, car, 88, 89, 90, and 91. Thus, the missing number would be 87. The physical eye and the reflecting eye sees different things. This is an example of seeing what we know. Our final year students were given this problem and were asked to discuss the problem and not actually solve it. This encourages students to reflect on what they are doing. They read the question and looked at the diagram and simply saw what they know. GEHF is a cyclic quadrilateral. So to find the value of X was easy. Their seeing eye saw the connection between what was given and the theorem that stated that the opposite angles of a cyclic quadrilateral are supplementary. As a result, 48 of the 50 participants determined that the value of X is 90 degrees. Only 2 of the students were able to conclude that on reflection, the question itself was not possible because EF and EDF had to be the same line based on the fact that for angle G to be 90 degrees, the hypotenuse must be the diameter of the circle. One student used Sketchpad to investigate the exact scenario and then declared that it was not possible to have such a problem. The problem here, and in many instances in mathematics, is that the physical eye and the reflecting eye sees different things. It is the task of the teacher to minimize this disjuncture. So here is a problem that I present at all of my lectures on visualization. I would like for you to solve this mentally. We will come back to this just now. It is not a difficult one, but I use it to illustrate the iterative process. A farmer wants to fence a square piece of land. He is certain that he needs to only have 8 poles on each side of the square. How many poles would he need? Think about how you will find the solution. So I'm interested more in the process, not the solution. It might seem as if I'm producing many bits of disconnected information, but I'm sure you will see the relevance eventually. In 1966, Jerome Bruner, in his book Toward a Theory of Instruction, wrote about 3 forms of representations: the enactive, the iconic, and the symbolic. The enactive deals with doing and experiencing the consequences of actions, which provides information and knowledge. All kinds of physical activities like tangrams, geoboards, counters, and so on can be used. The iconic relates to internal representations of external objects, visually in the form of a mental image or icon. So here the mind creates representations of the results of the experiences. The symbolic deals with the use of symbols and notations to represent other objects or functions. Whatever the activity is, the images created may result in some symbolic form. If you wanted to teach that the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees, then you would get them to measure the angles in as many different triangles as possible. They would then find the sum for each triangle. That is the enactive representation. The mind, in the meanwhile, realizes that it is possible that for all triangles, the sum of the angles could be 180 degrees. Further activities and the conviction grows. Hence, the conclusion can be drawn that for all triangles in two-dimensional geometry, x plus y plus z is equal to 180 degrees if x, y, and z are arbitrary angles of a triangle. I then hypothesize that the enactive and the iconic are dependent on sight. The engagement in an activity and then the creation of a mental representation is influenced by what is seen. Thereafter, the act of converting from the iconic representation to a symbolic one is insight. The idea of developing a generalization from some activity and experience is a useful idea to work with. This seminal piece of work had a great influence on my work, and I will show that later. Another critical researcher that played a key role in shaping my thoughts was Anna Svard. I was listening to her talk one day at a conference in Mexico and realized as she spoke that she was describing exactly what I wanted to do. So in looking at thinking and visualization in mathematics, it is difficult to ignore an important component, namely communication. This too is an interesting field, and communication is generally associated with the way people communicate ideas to or between groups of people, which is the interpersonal. I am interested in how we think in mathematics by communicating with ourselves, which is the intrapersonal. Usually, this occurs through the use of images. Svard sees this cognition as the combination of communication and cognition. This is my sphere of research. This has become my universe. Not much of the research we do in education tries to address, much of the research we do in education tries to address the issue of learner understanding. What does it mean to understand something, especially in mathematics? How does one develop deep conceptual knowledge as compared to procedural knowledge or ritualistic knowledge? This idea of conceptual and procedural knowledge is explained quite succinctly by Rebecca Chowkey and John Hasselbank. In this three-dimensional model, they demonstrate how, as a novice, one moves from the shallow to deeply connected conceptual knowledge to become more practiced and expert in the concept. When a novice begins learning, concepts and procedures are not well memorized and are isolated and disconnected. The expectation is that eventually the learners would attain the stage where concepts are well memorized and are well connected and understood, and procedures are understood and executed intelligently. The idea is to move from this point to this point with great creativity and ease. The value in this model is to see what role visualization plays in the entire process. Through my work, I found the role that visualization plays. The starting point for deep conceptual and procedural understanding is when learners become actively engaged in activities that stimulate their visual faculties, getting them to do something instead of being passive listeners. The active engagement could be physical with their hands, cutting, measuring, building, drawing, or mentally by manipulating images and symbols in the mind. Visualization processes simply enable the mind to see what the eye may not necessarily focus on. The mental reflection and its transformation into a written or verbal form may precipitate further reflection and hence new knowledge. This process of reflection and transformation may continue several times through an iterative process until understanding is achieved. I would love for you to see my work of art in trying to convey this idea of iteration during the reflective process, the changes that occur from 1 to 2 to 3. This then was my first attempt at the model in 2020. Through further abstraction and research, I refined the previous model to assume this form. Now I realize that the active engagement with physical objects, which was manipulatives or technology, was part of the process of meaning making. This was important to note because mathematics is a symbolically intensive discipline, and interpreting and analyzing these symbols was part of the mental process as well. Without understanding the simple symbols, for example, triangle is parallel to, is congruent to, the process of meaning making is impeded. From some of the work of my research participants, I know that learners think, write, think again, write, and so on. This visual analytical thinking leads to the conceptualization of new knowledge or the transformation of old knowledge. This is an example of a PGCE student's thinking. He was simply asked, can the line drawn have a gradient of 2? The student showed a high level of cognitive response. He was obviously thinking extensively about what he was doing, and his communication was retarded by his poor a priori knowledge. Think, write, strike off, think, write, strike off. In any event, by 2018, my work gathered much momentum. I finally had the necessary tools to develop my 4-stage iterative visualization thinking cycle. My work is concentrated in the first 2 stages. Knowledge development generally begins with the creation of mental images based on the a priori knowledge of the learner. Mental images are not necessarily pictures, but they could be words or any mental response to some external stimulus. These can be the result of pure imagination or through some form of visual mediators. By visual mediators, I refer to manipulatives that are either physical ones, like the geoboard, or technology such as Sketchpad. This is the doing stage, the engagement phase, either mental or physical engagement. In this stage, the purpose of the activity is to visualize the concept, to increase conviction about the result, just to see that it is true. By seeing that it is true, they will believe that it is true. For clarity, there are 2 types of visualization that we need to concentrate on. The first is related to the eye and vision, the seeing eye. We should only see what is given, what is there. So we should see a quadrilateral. This is just a quadrilateral, and perhaps the seeing brain can then determine that the sum of the internal angles is 360 degrees, nothing more. It is not a parallelogram. It looks like it, but we are not told that it is. So it is just a quadrilateral, and that's what the seeing eye sees. The second uses images for insight. The seeing brain. If I said that the opposite sides of the figure were equal, then we derive some insight, provided we have the requisite a priori knowledge. The following can be determined by the seeing brain. Opposite angles are equal, opposite sides are parallel, co-interior angles are supplementary, diagonals bisect each other, and we may determine other aspects of the diagram via the seeing brain. It's not given in the diagram, but the seeing brain sees all of that in the diagram. In stage 2, the process of meaning making is intensified through physical and mental manipulations of objects and images. Often this process is iterative because we may work with a few specific examples, then generalize, test the generalization, adapt the generalization, and so on before understanding occurs. Generally, when we say, I see what you mean, we imply, I understand what you mean. This is a critical stage because the environment must be conducive for both internalization and externalization processes to occur. So let us return to our farmer. I know that you calculated the answer already. Some of you probably multiplied 8 by 4 and the answer pops up to be 32. I'm interested in the process. Use your seeing brain and work with me now. Did you picture the poles? Did you rationalize that there should be 4 poles, 1 in each corner? So did you realize that there were already 2 on each side and we only needed 6 more per side? Did you see that the answer is 28 and not 32? So if there were 4 already in the corners, and if you needed 6 more per side, so it will be 6 times 4, 24, plus the 4 already there, which is 28 and not 32. So stage 3 is the stage where new knowledge is formed or old knowledge is transformed into something new. Here we would use visual analytical thinking to affirm the knowledge that we create. This is the point at which we say, I got it. I have just 3 examples of the same problem, but with different number of poles. The first requires 3 poles on each side, and it is easy to see that with the corner poles we will require only 4 more. So if you can picture it in your mind, 4 poles in the corners, there are 2 poles already. If we need 3 poles on each side, that means we need 1 more on each side. 4 poles plus 1 more on each side will give us 8 poles in total. This is the diagram. So mentally we can solve that. And so if it was 4 poles, so already there are 4 poles in each because of the corners, 2 poles on each side. We need 2 more per side. That means that would be 8 plus the 4 in the corners. It would give us 12. And already we are establishing a pattern. I say C because the first requires 3 poles on each side, and it is easy to see that with the corner poles, we will require only 4 more. I say C because I expect that you can visualize the corner poles, then realize that there are 2 poles on each side, and hence you would need 1 more on each side. Similar arguments can be made for 4 poles and 5 poles and 6 poles, any number of poles. So what are we doing? In this symbolic stage, we create a generalization that should work for any example. Hence, new knowledge has been formed or old knowledge has been transformed. Hence, we establish a general rule. The answer is 4 plus 4 times the number of expected poles minus the 2. The final stage is the simple application stage. We should be able to apply the knowledge learned to any appropriate problem in the future. For example, and let me go through this stage. So stage 4 is the application stage. It influences new knowledge and it uses the established generalizations to new knowledge. Let me give you another example. A farmer wants to fence a square piece of land. He is certain that he needs to only have 700 poles on each side of the square. How many poles would he need? So we have a problem with a very large number. It is not impossible to draw 700 poles on each side, but it would certainly be time-consuming. It is far easier to use the generalization, the already acquired knowledge. Here is an interesting point, though. If you sat back and thought about it, you will know that you have 4 poles, 1 in each corner, 2 on each side. You will have to have 698 more on each side. Multiplying 698 by 4, and I'm sure most of you can do this mentally, you will get 2,792, and then adding it to the 4 poles, you will get an answer of 2,796. That would give you the answer. If you could multiply such numbers in your head, right? Otherwise, the answer should look like this, using the generalization that we had established. This then is my iterative visualization thinking cycle. It was published for the first time in 2021, and it will now appear later this year in the opening chapter of a book titled Visualization and Epistemological Access in Mathematics Education in Southern Africa as a Theoretical Framework for Visualization Research. Sorry, I'm not showing off, but I really don't know how these guys appeared here. I began this daunting task eons ago as a baby in the field. I stood on the shoulders of so many giants, and I am glad that I completed this Mobius trip on a strip that has no start and no end. Here I am at the threshold of my next trip. This is a never-ending journey, imagining, thinking, theorizing, and feeling the excitement of reading and writing. My new trip has just begun, but the work also continues through my students who are now academics at different institutions. Jaya Naidu, Mzwandile Zulu, Benjamin Tatira, Benjamin Shangwe, Rajesh Budram, Sufiso Nslaba, Ishara Daulat, and Sislo Bosinkosi Mpofu engage in research and contribute to the corpus of knowledge. This next Mobius trip will certainly be more interesting. I thank every one of you for spending this afternoon with me. God bless you all.
It is my pleasure to take the podium to deliver the vote of thanks. First, let me thank Professor Vimolan Mudaly for the inspiring inaugural address that he has shared with us today. As UKZN, we are proud to have you as a distinguished member of our academic community. We are grateful to you for sharing your wisdom with us. Over and above your wisdom, your kind-heartedness, inclusivity, spiritual orientation, and humor go a long way in keeping the college leadership together. I am certain that members of the College Leadership Forum will be my witnesses. We are truly grateful to your family, and this being Women's Month, we will single out your mother, Mrs. Mudaly, who bestowed this gift, which is you, upon us, and your partner, Professor Ronika Mudaly, whom I am certain is one of the bedrocks behind your successes. Your family as well, and I've noted that at least two of your children, Deveshni and Shivani, are in the audience and were sharing in the chat today. Apologies if I have missed some of your children and family members. Also, we want to express our appreciation to the great educators on whose shoulders you stand. Today's lecture has been attended by delegates from within the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the province, the country, as well as internationally. There are too many of them to single out. We thank you all for celebrating Professor Mudaly's successes with us today. Finally, I would like to thank the Dean and Head of School, the School of Education, Professor Thabo Msibi, colleagues in the School of Education, colleagues in the entire university community, and the Department of Education, including the Department of Basic and Higher Education, for providing an intellectual home to our inaugurant, Professor Mudaly. To the corporate relations team, ably led by Ms. Norma Zondo, Ms. Pamela Adams, Ms. Sandra Ramsurup, thank you for organizing yet a flawless inaugural lecture. With those words, I thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, and may you go in peace. Thank you.
Well done, Prof. Mudaly. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Congratulations, Prof. Mudaly. Well
Thank
done.
you so much. Thank
It
you.
was
I
very
hope it came
interesting,
out
very
the way it should have.
inspiring. And, you know, I think you just kept most people captivated.
Absolutely. Really lovely. Really, really lovely. Fantastic, fantastic work.
Thank you. I hope it came out the way
Professor
I
M,
wanted.
Professor MCB, please take care of yourself. Go and have some meds in, please.
Please go to the doctor, Prof.
Yes, I'm heading that way now.
Yeah.
Thank you
I
for
could
staying.
not miss this. Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. Have a
Thank
good
you. You
Bye-bye.
too. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor Mkiza, for all your help, your assistance always.
I think it's gone.
Oh,
It's
he's
gone.
gone already.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Vimolan. Take care.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you,
You're
Sandhya.
most welcome.
Okay,
You've done
all of the best. Thank you.
Fantastic work. Fantastic work, Pam. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thanks,
Thank
Prof.
you.
MCV.
Thank
All of the best.
you.
Welcome, Prof.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.